In our network world, global challenges go beyond national borders and national interests. We're in a difficult situation. Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine, China's increasingly aggressive rise to power, gallium, germanium, and graphite are already speaking a clear language. So let's express our strategic sovereignty. Let's show that we can act effectively. Just 4 months ago, the Commission put forward a Raw Materials Act. Another 4 months required for trialogue, 1 more month to have the final vote here in Parliament. This is record-breaking fast work. Europe is showing that we can act rapidly, and we should do this more often in future. I think this is a good, feasible, practical law which ensures a reliable supply of critical raw materials for Europe that will further the digital and green transitions and support our economy. It will help the economy rather than burdening it. It will simplify the permitting procedure. It will give planning security for companies rather than more reporting requirements. Many of the key points of the Parliament's position are included. I'll flag up 4 of them for you. A new innovative concept with a recycling benchmark based upon the raw materials that are already available to us in waste. This is a realistic approach. Rather than looking at insecure forecasts for consumption in 2030, what we're talking about is the quantity of those critical raw materials in waste now and how much we can recycle. So that sends out a clear signal to the recycling industry. We want strategic raw materials recycled in Europe. Second point, ambitious and plannable permitting procedures. At the moment, permitting procedures for critical raw material projects have a 15-year time window on average. Time is money. We need to shorten these time frames. 15 months for processing projects and recycling projects. These kind of ambitious timeframes will finally allow planning security for companies in Europe. Thirdly, clear central partners to speak to. All too often, different bureaucratic offices dealing with different issues was too complicated. Now we ensure that there's a single authority that's responsible for the permitting process. And for the company, it's even better. They always have one central interlocutor who is responsible for their project. Thirdly, then we have a burst for innovation along the value chain. Strategic projects can be promoted through, that's one of the initiatives of this Parliament. We want to ensure that we can scale up and promote innovation. This will mean a reduction of the waste from mining. That's going to be important. Every critical raw material that we can reuse or avoid the use of is one that we don't have to import. That will all allow us to be an attractive partner for partners around the world. This will help us to deal with economic and geopolitical risks, and the extraction industry, the processing, the recycling and waste will create new chances for our partners and for us. So we create planning security for companies, we create genuine incentives for private investment in the EU with reliable partners in third countries, we secure jobs and prosperity, we reduce dependency, and we ensure ourselves against the storms of geopolitics, whether they're coming from east or west. So I would like to thank the European Council and the Spanish Council presidency. I'd also like to thank the Commissioner, particularly Commissioner Breton and his Director General, and I'd like to thank everyone responsible in the European Parliament and your teams for this productive, future-orientated negotiations and the constructive work over the last few months. I'd particularly like to thank the staff of the European Parliament for ensuring that we could get the process through so quickly. And I'm looking forward to an interesting debate.
Herzlichen Dank für den
Thank you very much. For the International Trade Committee, Mrs. Asimakopoulou.
Thank you very much. In July, China said there would be a partial ban on exports of gallium, and it accounts for a large share of this in the world. Now, rare earths and magnesium, actually 100% of the EU's needs come from China. Critical raw materials are key if we are to move forward with the green transition and the digital transition. Batteries, electrical cars, wind turbines, and mobile phones, they all need these CRMs. So this act will help us make sure we have enough supply and diminish the dangerous dependence on one sole supplier. Producing CRMs within the EU is part of the solution. Greece has the possibility of producing a lot of gallium, which can account for part of what the EU needs. The European Parliament is sending out a clear message today. The EU is ready to tackle the flaws and weaknesses in the supply chain. So the CRM Act has to be supported with new sources of funding now. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the ENVI Committee. The next speaker is Mrs. Polfjärd.
Herr talman.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Today we are voting to improve our access to raw materials in the EU. We're talking about minerals and metals that we need for the green transition and for our future economy. So this is an important decision we are taking. At the moment, it's very difficult to extract these materials in the EU, so we are dependent on imports from third countries. This is a risky situation. We've seen this previously with geopolitical issues and protectionist tendencies we can see around the world. So we have an opportunity to change this with this legislation. And that would be very important. We need these minerals for the transition, and we are seeing increased demand for these minerals in our green transition. So it's time that we act here. Mining once made Sweden rich, and it's something that will help Europe on its future journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Commissioner Breton.
Merci.
Thank you very much, President, Madam Rapporteur, Nicola, colleagues, members. I'd like to salute the work done by the European Parliament over the last few months on the Critical Raw Materials Act. When we made this proposal, it was in March, we had a joint commitment to act on critical raw materials, to reduce our dependency and to ensure that we could have a secure and sustainable supply of these materials. We have made progress despite our differences at the outset. We have been able to get this through the legislative process in record time, and we cover the whole of the value chain. We support the extraction, processing and recycling of critical raw materials in Europe. The whole continent needs to understand the key role of trade and international partners as well. We need to improve the security of supply through this proposal, whilst also ensuring that environmental standards are not only respected but also reinforced. We strengthen the EU against the kinds of pressure that third parties want to exert upon us, and we're increasing our capacity for industrial production in Europe so that we can have a Europe that can be the master of its own destiny. I could just like to welcome certain elements from the Parliament here. You have worked hard to reduce administrative burdens, to streamline procedures, because some of the declaration obligations are inevitable. Some of the rationalisation has allowed for timeframes to be reduced, particularly on strategic projects, and the Parliament has also included a realistic objective for reducing demand, particularly taking into account environmental risk and making multi-partite governance an important part of the whole certification system. You have bolstered the ambition of the regulation on sustainability without reducing the impact of the proposal for economic growth. The Parliament has also insisted on the fact that strategic partnerships have to bring local added value, and they have to strengthen social and economic development in developing countries too. All of these elements were included in the final deal, and they will help us to conclude future strategic partnerships. Thank you very much for all of your work, and I'd also like to thank the Spanish and Swedish presidencies of the Council. The Critical Raw Materials Act will enter into force at the beginning of next year, and it's important that Europe should catch up in the race for access to critical raw materials. That's why yesterday the Commission started meetings with industrial partners in the critical raw materials chain. Strategic projects have to become reality on the ground. So I count upon the Parliament to ensure that the momentum is maintained and the commitment of the Member States to support this European agenda are followed up on. Finally, there will be a governance forum in the form of the Critical Raw Materials Board. They will keep a look at stocks and spread best practice, particularly when it comes to public procurement and implementation of national extraction programs and circularity. The Parliament will have an important role monitoring this legislation, and you will have a scrutiny role when it comes to the activities of the board and the implementation of the Act as a whole. The Parliament's contribution has been determinant in ensuring that this is an important piece of legislation, and I am convinced that you will support this new regulation. Thank you very much.
Merci. Wir haben noch zwei Sprecher.
We still have two more speakers on behalf of committees. Now on behalf of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Miriam Lexman is next.
Danke. Dear colleagues, Commissioner, let me thank colleagues across this House for their cooperation and speedy conclusion of negotiations of this file, which reflects the urgent need to implement its provisions. In today's world, geopolitical context, it is essential for the EU not to be dependent on few suppliers, especially those which pose a security threat to the Union, like the totalitarian China. I believe that coordination and cooperation with our allies and strategic partners are key to successful implementation of this Act. This is why I initiated a joint declaration of legislators from around the world to work together in ensuring secure, ethical and sustainable access to critical raw materials, which will be published later today. In this context, I also encourage the Commission to conclude more such partnerships and to add a critical raw materials component to existing and future agreements with third countries. Thank you.
Danke für den Ausschuss für Regional.
Thank you very much. Now on behalf of the Regional Development Committee, Franz Bogovic.
Commissioner, President, dear colleagues, also the RIGI Committee happily supports this basic report and adds its opinion to it. In our opinion, we support the basic objectives to increase the extraction of these minerals in Europe. We also welcome the increased capacity of processing and recycling, and also the diversification of supply. It is very important that we ensure the speed of siting of such projects and also the speed of permitting procedures, and it is extremely important to work together with the local and regional communities. Without engaging local communities, these objectives will be hard to achieve. This is why we very much want that all of those who want to site and implement such projects come to local communities, also ensure additional infrastructure, and this will also provide new jobs in the environment, and this will be the best guarantee for strategic projects to be successful in the future. Mr. Commissioner, I hope that you receive as many as strategic projects as possible and that we achieve strategic autonomy when it comes to raw materials in Europe.
So the next speaker are the 8 representatives of the political groups. We'll start with Hildegard Bentele.
Sehr geehrter Herr Kommissar Breton,
Commissioner Breton, ladies and gentlemen, we have an EU Critical Raw Materials Act. And we did this with a lot of female power. We have made this at the centre of our EU industrial strategy, and we've sent out an important message by doing this to the global economy, that we as the EU are going to be active in maximising our potential in dealing with the need for raw materials in the future, for future technologies, and it will be made in Europe, that we will have new stable relations with reliable partners, so it will be a win-win situation. In our raw materials relationships, we will have real social dialogue, transparency, sustainability. This is not just about getting more and more. It's about improving efficiency and systematically trying to use waste or recycling or substitutions. We are sending a clear message to investors and employers. For strategic projects, authorizations will be sped up, so it'll be much easier to manage the risks, and it will be better for banks to invest. Companies will have more options for cleaner and reliable raw materials sources. We need to manage this critical raw materials risk management, but without new bureaucracy. When it comes to processing, mining, recycling, all of this will be part of the Green Deal and will create new job potential. We are putting in place the structures for more efficiency, future digitalisation, protecting the environment. This new framework is going to provide more security for our citizens as well. And we look forward to working in the implementation of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Mohammed Shaheen.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President. It's straightforward. The more energy and green electricity we have, and the less coal, the more lithium we're going to need. We also need a whole set of materials for solar panels and generators. Now, these raw materials can be found outside the EU, but I think that the EU also has to examine closely where we can get these raw materials and how we can better use the ones that we do have in Europe already. Now, we need better partnerships with third countries, but we have to be on an equal footing with our partner countries and suppliers. So we need a raw material green transition as well. We have to improve manufacturing with sustainable technology. I'd like to congratulate the rapporteur and the Commission. Let us implement this act properly. Thank you.
Madame Marie-Pierre Vedrenia.
menace sur nos importations.
A threat to our gallium imports, a threat to our germanium imports, a threat to our graphite imports, a threat to our rare earth oxide imports. This will damage Europe's economy. We have to put an end to this situation of dependency through this Critical Raw Materials Act. We need to diversify our cooperation. We need to work together with our partners on the route to carbon neutrality. That's what's special about Europe, that we can work together to respond to global challenges. We can get third countries on board, and we can get citizens on board. To do that, we need to explain, be transparent. We need to now debate the implementation of these partnerships in practice. Europe needs to emerge from its state of dependency, but it needs to benefit everybody, and this process needs to be transparent. That's what's special about Europe. That's what we have fought for, and that must now become reality. Thank you.
Frau Henrike Hahn.
Thank you very much. Henrike Hahn is next.
Der Green Deal braucht kritische Rohstoffe und
For our Green Deal, we need critical raw materials, and Europe has delivered extremely quickly. We're diversifying our supply chains. This is going to be important for industry and for small businesses in Europe. Lithium and other rare earth materials are extremely important. We'll use them for solar panels, electric cars, computer chips, wind turbines. With this legislation, in 2023, we have in record time reached a milestone for mining these raw materials in Europe. We are working on reducing our dependence on these critical raw materials and looking at substitutions. With the CRMA, we have green technology made in Europe. We have the possibility to work on our strategic autonomy and not have to worry about importing from questionable countries such as Russia or China. We are building a raw materials sector here in Europe. We are building strong global partnerships so we can be competitive in the green economy without negatively impacting our economy. The recycling benchmark will now be 25% of the annual consumption of these strategic raw materials. We will be looking at how we can recycle these from waste in the EU, and this is extremely positive for the recycling industry as well. So that's very important for us as Greens. Our civil economy has to be involved in mining in Europe as well, and we have a final text that refers to the OECD text and guidelines, which is very important. The final text also has a recital against deep-sea mining, and that is important. We want that to remain a taboo in the EU. The European Parliament's mandate has protection measures in. That's important. We want to make sure that there are no provisions that are detrimental to the environment. We want this green transition. We need those critical raw materials. So we need to focus our mining and our extraction and use the highest social and environmental criteria. Thank you.
Ms. Klotz, Isabella Helena.
Mrs. Klotz is next speaker.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Komisarzu.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, Poland produces two types of raw materials that are extremely important. Coking coal, which is vital for producing steel and copper, and vital also for semiconductors, therefore, and cables. After tricky but effective negotiations, and thank you very much for them, we managed to make sure that coking coal was included in the list. It plays a very important role in the European economy, and this is recognized by the European Commission itself. And thank you very much, Commissioner Breton, for this. The energy transition needs steel, copper, and a lot of other critical raw materials that we have to look for in the EU first and foremost. And we also have to make sure that we look at our technological capacity and what we have here in the EU. If we move too quickly, then we're encouraging companies to relocate, and this will deindustrialize the EU. The European economy will not be appealing or attractive, and if ideology comes first and foremost, then we could have these consequences. Now, I think that there's a lot of common sense here. We also have to think about the economic plan and the forecast. Jastrzębie mine in Poland plays an important role in manufacturing coking coal. The miners in Silesia play an important role.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. Well, when you start building a house, you start with the foundations and not with the roof. And before we start setting ambitious objectives, we have to ask ourselves, have we got the necessary tools at our disposal to actually achieve those objectives? This is the umpteenth confirmation that the green transition has not been put together with the highest degree of rationality. I would like to compliment the rapporteur, however, because she has conducted this work with a good level of speed. You could actually say that her initial remarks were a bit too optimistic, but nevertheless, the text that we'll be voting on in this plenary is one that La Lega will be supporting. But this text arrives too late. And in addition, there's a lack of sufficient financing. I think we need to have a look at what other countries have been doing, such as the United Kingdom. They have also been working on critical raw materials. So we are laying the first bricks, but we are playing catch up, and it's going to be a complicated process. Thank you.
Ernst, Sie haben das Wort.
Mrs. Cornelia Ernst is the next speaker.
Thank you very much. The Commission proposal, when we first saw this, caused great concern to me and other civil society actors. It seemed as if it was just a gift to industry. For our group, as for others, we needed to have clearer guidelines, higher environmental standards, better respect of human rights. So we negotiated in the EP, and worked together with the rapporteur to get a new position, looking at the social and environmental standards, looking at free, prior and informed consent for indigenous people, and looking at deep sea mining as well, and the status of strategic projects. The trilogues always means we have to take a slightly different perspective, things that we have to think again. So the FPIC, for example, so we have mixed feelings here. We are pleased that there will be consultation with indigenous people to try and minimize any kind of damages, but we would have preferred to have a clear consent principle formulated. More than 50% of the raw materials are found in the territories of indigenous people. So we have to bear in mind the social and environmental standards. It's hugely important. A lot has been done here, and I hope that the implementation will live up to this. Thank you.
Sprecher ist Monsieur
Next speaker is Mr. Juvin.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. A lot has been said on what isn't quite a rare earths war, but is at least a critical raw materials race. I would like to highlight 4 key points. First of all, it's not just about price, because this is more of a tug of war. It's about power. We have to make sure that the European nations set their priorities and use their clout on the ground. Let us not allow ourselves to have our back up against the wall. We cannot just depend on one single country or one region. Innovation has to help us move towards substitution or replacement. Rare earths and fertile soil is something rare as well. Let us not allow ourselves to be trapped by geopolitical interests that are not ours. Let us not let conflicts and wars that aren't ours trap us. European interests must prevail.
Madame Maria de Grassa Carvalho.
Next is Mrs. Carvalho. The floor is yours.
Caro Presidente.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. External dependence for the European Union when it comes to critical raw materials is an obstacle to our future. We need to take advantage of the resources that we have available. We have to reduce bureaucratic barriers to mining activities and ensure that that activity is responsible and sustainable. The Critical Raw Materials Act is a step in the right direction. At the same time, though, at the member state level, the important thing is that these processes should be transparent and should involve local authorities, local populations, local companies and associations in all decisions that are taken. In Portugal, my own country, unfortunately, the current government has gone for a very opaque strategy towards lithium mining. The consequences are not hard to predict. They have been very negative consequences. We need to defend the public interest, working together with the general public. Thank you very much.
Das Wort steht nun bei Herrn Jens.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Jens Geier.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner Breton, dear colleagues. For our electric cars, our wind turbines, our computers, a lot of our future technologies, we are dependent on these raw materials and we're dependent on importing them. And we saw rare earth materials were found in Sweden at the beginning of this year. So we need to continue looking for these raw materials. And it's good that we have better authorizations now. But we need to have higher environmental standards in this area. Recycling is sustainable. It's important. We have a 25% target now, and I am pleased that we have that. It's going to be important in Germany and North Rhine-Westphalia, where we have a lot of work in this area. We also have substitution products, lithium being substituted, for example. If we do this, we can reduce the power of dictators, and that will be positive for the world. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Karin Karlsbro.
Herr talman!
President, Commissioner, colleagues, in Europe, we consume about a quarter of the world's raw materials, but we only produce 3% ourselves, so we are largely dependent on imports, primarily from China. Trade creates prosperity, but that can be at a price. For the climate, we need electrification, and that requires huge quantities of critical raw materials. In Sweden and other parts of Europe, there are huge reserves underground, but we do not take advantage of them as we should. Now that Russia is turning off the gas taps and China is reducing its supply of critical raw materials, so not producing is a bad idea. We cannot extract these materials at the expense of indigenous peoples or the environment. We are voting for a plan to increase the recycling of critical raw materials in Europe, and I think that that shows that we need to unite for better sustainability.
Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Next speaker is Sarah Mathieu.
Collega's, commissaris, de vraag naar kritieke grondstoffen voor onze wind.
Thank you very much. The issue of critical raw materials is vital for our electric cars and other products. Demand has skyrocketed, and that is why the more renewable energy we want, the more critical raw materials we need. We have to look at how we can work in a smarter way and how we can recover certain raw materials. We need to ride our bikes more. We need to use electric cars more. We need, of course, a certain amount of fossil fuels, but we have to introduce rules to curtail the use of certain materials. We need to reduce our need for energy, because in this way we'll be able to reduce our dependence on authoritarian regimes, and we'll be able to promote circular economy, and that will benefit our pockets. It will be good for the economy and for everyone. Thank you.
Mr. Johan Nissen has the floor next.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the moment, we have a Chinese monopoly for our critical raw materials that we need for electric cars, solar panels and wind turbines. Previously, we were dependent on Russian gas, and now we are dependent on China. So we're just swapping one dictatorship for another. We should not forget that China can easily increase materials when they want. We don't want to get caught in a political power play here, so we need to do everything we can to reduce our dependence. So it's important that we open up new Swedish mines, but that's not going to be enough. The mines we open aren't going to end our dependence. It's a dream to be 100% renewable. Thank you.
Danke, Madame Marie Doshi. The floor.
Next is Marie Doshi.
Chers collègues,
Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to vote on a proposal for regulation on critical raw materials after negotiations with other institutions. Finally, you recognize your mistakes. For years, we've been condemning your ultra-liberal policy that led to unfair competition and made us dependent on raw materials that are key for industry. But finally, you've woken up, better late than never, even though it took you way too long. You're finally admitting that countries should be able to fund forward-looking projects to compete against our international rivals. You want to reduce our dependence by setting partial autonomy targets and partially limiting imports from third countries. You finally recognize the fact that we will not tolerate importing materials that do not respect human rights and environmental standards. This shows once again the failure of the EU. Better late than never, but how much time have we lost because of the fact that you remained inactive? Thank you.
Frau Marlene Björk.
Next is Malin Björk.
tack.
Thank you very much. Well, probably we'll be seeing more mining in the EU in the near future. We need these minerals and materials for our cars, for our wind turbines, etc. But it's very important that this mining should take place in an ecologically and socially sustainable manner. We have to mine in a manner that respects the environment. We have to do so while protecting indigenous people's rights. We have to do it so that we do not deplete the soil too much. And so I have tried to ensure that this legislation takes into account all of these, that we have environmental assessments, we protect indigenous people's rights, the Sami in Finland and Sweden in particular, and we should now already be taking the steps needed to reduce demand for these materials so that we also reduce our energy demand at the same time. These are steps that we have to take to accompany our steps to mine more. Unfortunately, my own government has worked hard to undermine indigenous people's rights. They are undermining the work that's been done in the parliament. We need to ensure that this legislation should have demands. I don't think the current legislation lives up to the requirements. If we are to have socially, economically and environmentally sustainable mining, it has to be socially and environmentally sound and based on democratic decision-making.
Katalina Roth-Nedavalova is next. Thank you very much, President. I think this legislation is very important. We need to be responsible to our citizens when it comes to deciding where this mining will take place. We know that these raw materials are very important for our different technologies. I am pleased that we will be looking at recycling more. We want to support recycling in the future. We don't want to be just sending our waste to Africa, so we need to look at mining and extraction in Europe. I think that's very important. Our production capacity, our processing should be increased. Our policy of colonialism should be limited, and we should concentrate on what we have available to us. I think the 40% target for us in Europe is very good.
Presidente, thank you very much.
Digital technologies, as we know, play a decisive role in promoting innovation and competitiveness in industry. And no one doubts that to fully develop digital technologies, we need critical raw materials. Thanks to the European Parliament, the agreement with the Council includes permit procedures that are faster, better recycling policies, better waste management, and a list of critical raw materials, including aluminium and graphite, that play a very important role in the value chain, is the European Parliament's contribution to the whole process, and we must be very pleased with this. International partnerships with third countries that are trustworthy play a key role. This has been mentioned before. These third parties or third countries are more stable and more reliable. We have to pay particular attention to EU-funded projects. In a nutshell, in order to boost the competitiveness of the EU industry on the global stage, and in order to consolidate our strategic autonomy and sovereignty, the CRM plays a very important role. It's also a tangible example of the added value provided by the European Union. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Lina Galvez-Munoz. Thank you very much, President. Chair, congratulations to the negotiating team and to the Spanish presidency. This is a very important agreement that puts in place the basis for our strategic autonomy and guarantees access to critical raw materials for European reindustrialization and the necessary green and digital transition. It means the creation of quality jobs. It means we can help people in areas at risk of depopulation. We have a target of 40% for processing and refining, a recycling target of 25% of annual consumption by 2030. There is also an increase in what has to be recovered from waste. That is also important. There is a greater environmental sustainability guarantee, more economic sustainability. It is a more balanced relationships with our social partners, and there will be more research to discover new raw materials. We have to bear in mind the impact that mining has on certain areas. We have to make sure that citizens are fully involved and participate in the benefits and profits here as well. So we need to invest in training and teaching skills, ensuring quality jobs. There are 17 critical materials identified in Andalusia. So we will be closely following the implementation of this. We want to make sure this brings well-being to the citizens, more strategic autonomy, and high environmental and social standards. Thank you very much.
Danke. Herr Dragos Tudorakis.
Mr. Dragos Tudorakis is next.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner Breton, dear colleagues. The Critical Raw Materials Act is a clear statement of intent. We want the EU to be a visionary and astute geopolitical actor with the tools to match that ambition. Besides the important trade and environmental aspects that this agreement covers, we are stepping up the game in strengthening our resilience and fostering our priorities in a divided world with many challenges to come. With this act, we are creating the right conditions, sourcing the right materials for achieving the green and digital transition objectives. By boosting investments and encouraging innovation within the Union and beyond its borders, we reduce dependencies so that we can remain competitive without renouncing our values, refusing to be economically and politically coerced. I think this is one of the major achievements of this legislature, and I want to congratulate the rapporteur and the shadows for the work done in this file. Thank you.
Danke, Madame Rose. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Caroline Rose is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. The green transition is going to require huge quantities of critical raw materials. We need to ensure that the EU can get its supplies from its own territory, particularly given the challenges faced at the social, environmental and human level. We have to ensure that this mining activity takes place within planetary boundaries. The Commission has put forward interesting proposals on circularity and recycling, but they haven't really put forward a less wasteful model, and they haven't questioned the issue of making everything digital. Unfortunately, this is an extractivist logic that is being pursued here. The right of indigenous peoples and local populations have to be respected, including the prior consent principle, and that should be informed consent. We cannot continue to endanger nature through our mining activities, but in this legislation, member states reserve the right to carry out extractive activities in protected areas and to place public interest criteria on top of those. We have to be very vigilant.
Okay.
Mr. Tobolowski is next.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Komisarzu, Szanowni
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Everything that we have done to achieve this text is extremely important, and the timing is perfect because we want to breathe new life into the process of extracting new critical raw materials and processing them. We have to focus on recycling and support research and development so that we can have sound management of raw materials and their substitutes. This act includes very important points. I'd like to draw your attention to an aspect which is linked to increasing the extraction of raw materials in Europe. Will we be able to do this while we are actually destroying the extractive industry in the EU? We are trying to systematically eliminate mines in Europe. That is our policy, and that flies in the face of the provisions in this act. It could be that in a few years' time we won't have the facilities or the equipment or the mining companies necessary and will become dependent on raw materials from third countries.
Thank you very much. Markus Buchheit is next. Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, you can see that we are in a very difficult situation with critical raw materials, and this was predictable, but we're still flailing around as we were in the past. And the causes for this are issues with ideology that we've included in our trade agreements in the past. We should be honest to industry, employers, workers, and say that here in this Parliament, before as now, we are putting ideology before industry. Thank you very much.
Am Wort ist Herr Miguel Urban Crespo.
Next is Miguel Urban Crespo.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, President. The truth is that there is a global race to control raw materials against the backdrop of an ecological emergency. Now, the green transition is being called into question, leading to mining fever around the world. All we talk about is the Green Deal, but to manufacture electric cars in Europe, we need more mining in the global south and here in Europe. Europe. Raw materials, not only for a green transition, but also to fuel the arms race. This is a green capitalism that is tainted with blood, because this is polluting soil, and it is also expelling those who live on this land. But there is more and more resistance that want to fight against this mining fever, such as the Ecuador mining front, which we greet from here. We don't want a new neo-colonialist mining wave. We want to consume less and distribute more. Green capitalism is not okay. There is a climate emergency at the moment. Thank you.
Is Madame Maxette Pirbacas.
Next is Maxette Pirbacas.
Monsieur le Président.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. Well, I'd love to say to you that the proposal for the proposed legislation is better than what was put forward originally. But actually, a lot of the objectives have been reduced because it's no point implementing things that are just not feasible in practice. What do citizens expect of the European Union? They expect a good Europe, a Europe that tries to find solutions for our future industries and to support major projects of collective public interest. So we should have no shame in acting in line with our interests. Without ideology, we should support our mining industry on the European mainland, but also in the outermost region, like Nouvelle-Calédonie. We need to ensure that environmental and social rules are respected. Thank you very much.
Frau Sarah Skyttedal.
And next is Sarah Skyttedal. Thank you very much, Chairman. Critical raw materials are key ingredients when it comes to our green transition. Without that, we're not going to manage the electrification of our transport and our industrial sectors. Previously, we have these critical raw materials from China, Africa, Asia. We have to think about if we're going to increase our dependence or look for these in Europe. The European Parliament's position when it came to negotiating the Critical Raw Materials Act includes important points such as free and prior informed consent, the FPIC. This is important because otherwise we have the potential consequences of indigenous people vetoing these mining. We have in Europe the Sami people who live in a lot of these areas where these minerals exist that are important for the transition. So we no longer have the veto right in this legislation. We have a lot of steps that are taken in the wrong direction. We have to make sure we're not hampering European industry with this. Thank you.
Frau Zvestelina Penkova.
Ms. Penkova is the next speaker.
Chair, Commissioner Breton, dear colleagues, all the technologies we will need to reach our climate ambitious goals will require huge quantities of raw materials. Electric cars, solar panels, batteries, ITC technologies, and more have a greater need for the critical raw materials. We need strategic partnerships with third countries to be able to diversify and assure a stable supply of those materials. We have to refine them in the EU and produce the final products here ourselves, and this can only happen by cutting red tape, boosting innovation, and developing alternative ways of production. Enhancing circularity and ambitious recycling targets are crucial to achieve the net zero production levels here in the EU. This legislation sets the right economic incentives for a more stable, secure, sustainable and socially responsible models for the deployment of mining and recycling projects. Of course, that includes also the faster permitting procedures. We cannot build a new green economy without ensuring the existence of the necessary resources. Thank you.
Danke. Herr Eroglu, the floor is yours.
Mr. Eroglu is the next speaker.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr
President, Commissioner, today we're voting on legislation which is good for the European Union because it makes us independent from imports, or at least less dependent on imports of critical raw materials. I am convinced that this law is a step in the right direction. I'd like to congratulate all of the people who've worked on it, especially Nicola Bear. You've worked on this at a pretty impressive pace and shown that the European Union is capable of acting rapidly. The EU will always be dependent on critical raw materials, but it's good that we have less bureaucracy and we make it easier to extract these resources in the EU. I think we send out a good signal as well with the recycling targets. We have to become less dependent on third countries. We need raw materials for our industry because we want to remain an industrialized continent. That is the position of our political family, and that's why this law is so important. Thank you.
Herr Ville Niinistö.
Mr. Niinistö.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Mr. Chair, the European Union with this legislative proposal is opening a fast track to the mining project by defining mining as a strategic project. The Commission can guide a member state into a direction in which ecological protection will be dismantled. And this is a wrong direction. We cannot carry out the green transition which is carried out at the cost of environmental targets, in which countries like Finland already have about 70% of its nature destroyed, according to the Nature Panel. The Finns can say to the Swedes, or Finns can say to Swedes can say to the Finns that, well, your nature can be destroyed because we need raw materials. And in this respect, the Sami people's position is very critical. That's why the Greens are critical about the legislative proposal, even if Parliament has improved it already. But we will vote against it.
Madame Skidedal.
Microphone for the speaker.
In
Sweden and Finland, there are a lot of critical raw materials under the ground. We need that for the green transition. I'm a bit surprised when I hear a Finnish member from the Finnish Green Party saying that they want to give the Sami the veto right for mining projects. So how are we going to have a green transition at all if we get these substances from China and Africa instead?
The floor is yours.
Herr talman, tack för frågan. Såklart som före detta
Well, thank you for the question. You will be aware that we do need to be able to open new mines in Finland and Sweden, but it has to happen in cooperation with strict environmental requirements. You can't simply forget environmental protections and the rights of the Sami. We need to have better use of the resources in the first place, better recycling, rather than trying to simply create more environmental problems in our natural environment. There were environmental problems already before this legislation. It's only going to get worse.
The floor is yours.
Dank u, voorzitter. Wij steunen volop, collega's, deze verordening.
Thank you very much. Now, colleagues talk about the imperious need of getting our hands on critical raw materials, saying that it's vital for our companies' competitiveness and so that we can depend less on China and the rest of the world. It is vital to make sure we have strategic autonomy. We live in a world where we are trying to reduce globalization. We have ties with China and the United States, and we know that we want to reduce our dependence on China, that now has a dominant position. So, welcome to the Critical Raw Materials Club. I think that this is a landmark act. We need an agreement on critical raw materials with the United States as well, so that we can better produce critical raw materials for electric batteries. Thank you.
Georg Mayer, the next speaker.
Thank you, President, colleagues. It is always a good idea to try and be dependent. This goes for many different sectors, but particularly for raw materials. However, I'm not sure that this act is going to get us there. Will we really make ourselves independent from Chinese raw materials? Because we have been dismantling mining in Europe for decades. So independence doesn't mean moving from China to other third countries. We've seen the problems we've had with Russia because we get that via third countries now. The EU hasn't dealt with getting these energy sources properly, whereas China has been looking at these markets and getting on top of this. So they have been quicker than us, and I think we have missed the moment. Thank you.
The next speaker is Marisa Matias. Thank you very much, President. Lithium literally moves mountains, and in Portugal's case, it actually knocks them down. So we need to show vigilance and scrutiny when it comes to how we supply ourselves with critical raw materials. We will never be able to do enough to ensure that the public interest is generally respected. We need to ensure that the economic interests of the few does not prevail over the general public interest. The government in Portugal is creating privileged regimes which damage local populations and the environment. There are legal subterfuges which push the planet beyond its limits and do not respect human rights. This is not the path that we can afford to take. Thank you.
Mark Tarabella, the floor is yours.
Mark Tarabella is the next speaker.
Qu'il s'agisse de smartphones.
Smartphones, solar panels, these are examples of where we need critical raw materials. They're part of our everyday life. Lithium and cobalt are crucial from a geopolitical point of view, and the crises that we're experiencing are just increasing their importance. We have to make sure the EU reduces its dependence on third countries and looks at its supply chains, and then measures on cooperating with third countries. This has to respect fundamental rights, and more specifically, workers' rights. We have to respect local communities and the environment. This is an opportunity to come up with a European strategic vision that will also include the principle of due diligence that we have supported here with great enthusiasm. Thank you.
Bujoy, the floor is yours.
Mr. Bujoy.
Thank you much, President. Dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, Chair Thierry, I want to congratulate and to thank Commissioner Breton and also our rapporteur and the negotiating team for the quick, constructive and successful negotiation. Several legislative proposals were high on the agenda this autumn in the remit of industry, but the proposal related to Critical Raw Materials Act is one of the most important, and I am glad to see its final adoption. The Act will ensure the supply of critical raw materials for strategic industry sectors and thereby contribute to the Union's strategic goals, Green Deal, digitalization, but also industrial independence by mitigating the risks for supply chains and ultimately enhance the Union's economic resilience. One of the most efficient ways to strengthen European industrial resilience and reduce dependencies is to diversify supply chain and invest into research. I echo that further support measures should be put in place to support research and innovation for material substitutions, including sustainable supplies in trade agreements and to strategic partnerships for raw materials. I believe it is important that the Critical Raw Material Act will establish lists of strategic raw materials and critical raw materials based on their economic importance and supply risk, and will implement faster permitting. As regulators, it is our privilege and duty to improve the resilience of the Union, and the field of industry is one that we should further improve, as it is at the core of the economic and should be prosperous to support our European way of life. Thank you so much.
Unser nächster Sprecher ist Herr.
The next speaker is Carlos Sorinho.
Senhor Presidente.
President, Commissioner, ensuring a secure supply of critical raw materials is a fundamental precondition if the EU is going to achieve open strategic autonomy. It's important if we are to be a global leader in a multipolar, multilateral world, consolidating our independence, which is a precondition for healthy interdependence. I'm pleased to see there's a broad consensus in the committee on the fundamental principles here. That's to say, a focus on research and innovation to find new materials and more sustainable processes so that we can be more competitive and reduce pressure on resources. There's also integrated monitoring of the supply chain, ensuring that recycling is given a better role. There's also improvements to the permitting processes and better partnerships with third countries, trying to ensure that we have active cooperation and effective use of the resource. We need to ensure that we do not engage in mining projects that do not show necessary due diligence. It's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, and it's good for people. Thank you very much.
Frau Susana Solis Perez, the floor is yours.
Gracias, presidente, comisario.
Thank you very much, President, Commission. We need lithium for batteries, and if we don't have rare earth materials, we don't have wind turbines or electric cars. China uses this as a geopolitical weapon, as Russia does with oil and gas. So if we don't have security of supply, we will not have strategic autonomy or our green transition. So this law that was pushed through very quickly is very welcome. We need alliances with reliable partners such as Chile. We also need to accelerate the issuing of permits, but this is not sufficient. In Spain, we have lithium and other rare earth materials, but it is difficult to mine because there is social opposition to these projects. It is not sufficient just to have high environmental and sustainability guarantees. We have to make sure that the local communities are fully involved in these strategic projects, that there's real added value and quality jobs in these areas. And as we have also called for, we need more efforts made when it comes to recycling waste and recovering these materials. Thank you.
Mr. Gallet is the next speaker.
Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup.
President, Commissioner, good morning to you, colleagues.
Act bringen wir auf den Weg.
We are getting the Critical Raw Materials Act on its way. I would have preferred if it was called the Heavy Metal Law. I think that would be more accessible to Europe's citizens. But have we rocked the scene? Well, not so sure about that. Yes, okay, we have taken a step in the right direction, but when I was standing on the edge of the biggest copper mine in Africa, in Calvezi, which I've already reported back to you on, you can see the kind of environmental consequences of mining. We don't see these kinds of mines in Europe, so why are the Conservatives trying to avoid having international standards such as free and prior informed consent? That's a UN standard that we could have just simply copy-pasted into our legislation, but rather we vaguely sort of mention something of the sort. And of course we need a veto right for affected communities in mining regions, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who have to give their consent. If we don't make a sufficiently attractive offer to them, that's our problem, and we have to come back to them with a better offer. So it is an improvement, but there's still a lot of space for improvement there.
Dan Bilan, Sie sind am Wort.
Mr. President, the Commissioner, today we address the Critical Raw Materials Act, a vital initiative for Europe's industry and economic prosperity. Our innovation-led continent has up to now been overly reliant on external sources for materials essential to technologies like chips, electric vehicle batteries or renewable energy systems. I believe this act will create a new dynamic, reducing our dependency on imports that pose risks to our economic security and increasing European ambitions, especially in the digital sphere. From the internal market perspective, I welcome the new provisions regarding large companies that will now assess risks in their supply of key raw materials, aiming to prevent any disruptions in supply chains that could affect consumers. I am confident that by making rules clearer for companies and reducing existing burdens, we can significantly boost business growth, particularly in sectors crucial to our technological and economic development. Thank you.
Danke. Monsieur Matteo Adinolfi.
Matteo Adinolfi is the next speaker.
Buongiorno, Presidente.
Good morning, President. The text we're discussing this morning aims to reduce dependence on China, both when it comes to extraction and processing of critical raw materials that are vital for energy transition, and for medical and electronic equipment. The EU strategy wants to improve the extractive capacity and processing in the EU, and also to diversify its partners, its trading partners. The CRM Act is also about more investment in research and innovation. In this way, it will protect the environment by promoting a circular economy, recycling, and higher sustainability. The agreement that we reached finally is a starting point to achieve self-sufficiency, and so that the EU will have a circular economy. It will breathe new life into the European economy, will guarantee new jobs over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Madame Pernille-Weiss, Sie sind am Wort.
Next speaker is Mrs. Pernille Weiss.
If something has to happen quickly in the EU, it can. And we need to act quickly because we need to get away from the dependency where we can only buy critical raw materials on the global market from much too few suppliers. So the green transition means that we need to get more out of our own soil. Otherwise, we won't reach our climate target instead of buying it. So the deindustrialization of the European economy will not become the innovative growth we need, not only for climate goals, but also for all we need in defense area, in social and lab sciences. So dear colleagues, thank you to the Commission and Council for the excellent cooperation we've had about the new Critical Raw Materials Act. And there's lots to follow up on and facilitate, because there's many conflicts lying hidden in the implementation of this. We're talking about the critical raw materials, but it's especially in the processing of them that we will have problems. Regardless of whether we mine them for the first time or recycle them in a circular economy, it needs to be done efficiently and without overlooking the need for research and innovation in substitute raw materials. China is 10 years ahead of everyone else, and that says something about the need we have for the speed in our innovation. There's no way around it. Get going.
Am Wort ist Frau Roman.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Jakovic.
Hvala, gospodine predsjedavajući, gospodine Breton. Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Breton, colleagues. Our economies cannot function without secure, transparent and sustainable critical materials. Therefore, this is of the utmost importance for the future of our European family. This week in the European Parliament, we are reacting to the aggressive trade practices of China and Russia. We are reducing our dependence on critical materials from third countries. And if we want to realize our goals of the Green Deal, we have to secure our raw materials value chains and need to be better when it comes to recycling. By adopting this act, we are one step nearer to strategic autonomy of the European Union and to securing and strengthening our position in the coming geopolitical tensions. Thank you.
Das Wort gebeten hat Frau Iskra Mihalova.
Mrs. Mikhailova is next.
Уважаеми господин председател, господин Chair, Commissioner, colleagues, I would like to congratulate the rapporteur for the effective and efficient work. I want to thank the entire team that worked on this file. The agreement reached with the Council and the Commission contains several very important elements I would like to highlight in this final debate. First, it encourages the refining, the recycling, the substitution within Europe, which is extremely important for our policies. The administrative burden is being reduced for companies working in this area, takes into account the need for financial incentives for pure technologies for critical raw materials, also offers a framework for strategic frameworks with third countries for strategic raw materials. Thank you.
Danke. Herr Kollege Alexandra.
Thank you. Alexandra Vondra is the next speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, the proposed CRM Act should have our attention if we want to give a chance to the Green Deal. So I'm going to vote in favor. However, allow me to make a few comments. When you build a house, you do not start with the roof. So when you propose a legislative act, it should have its logic. We have needed this act quite a long time before when we adopted the battery proposal. At that time, we realized that we are going to face a lot of troubles. Secondly, it is very good that we do not want to switch from one dependency on fossil fuels to another dependency. However, to be prescriptive about targets for 2030, that reminds me of theoretical economic exercises that we used to have under the communist regime. However, what is important now is that we are going to have accelerated permitting procedures, and hopefully people who live at extraction sites are going to understand this.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. The next speaker is Alessandro Panza.
Caro Commissario.
Commissioner, well, better late than never, eh? One of the few common-sense proposals from this Commission mandate has arrived right at the end of a legislative period that has been full of ideology. Maybe you could have got down to these common-sense proposals a bit earlier. We're dealing with the green transition. We need the technology and the materials in place first. But instead, you started the wrong way around. Cars, agriculture, mining. We now suddenly realize that to achieve the objectives we've set, we need the resources. You try to build a house, but you haven't asked whether you've got the bricks to build it. Europe depends on third countries to import all of the rare raw materials that are needed for the green transition and electrification. Most of our imports come from outside the EU's countries, but not even the EU's alliances. So I think you don't need to be a scientist to realize that critical raw materials are our weak point, that we are dependent on China. So that's why this is a good proposal. It's a pragmatic approach. It's concrete. It's very aware of reality. And I think that finally this is a chance to abandon all of the utopias that have been indulged in previous years.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Martin Kemp.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar, liebe
Commissioner, President, colleagues, our transition to climate neutrality means we need to act accordingly when it comes to our critical raw materials. It is necessary for environmentally friendly technologies and digitalization. If we want to see technological progress and use our resources sensibly, we need to look at the entire supply chain, and we need to really look at how we use our critical raw materials. We need to use them in a sensible way. We need to look at the circular economy, repair, reuse, recycling, and hopefully we can improve our use of critical raw materials in this way. There needs to be an attractive alternative for companies, so we need to see more innovation and research so we can really value these better in a environmental, social, economic way. And we need to be able to guarantee our supply of critical raw materials. We need to be careful about our dependence on third countries. So we need to diversify. We need to ensure we have secure supply chains. We need to build that up. And we need to strengthen the sovereignty of the EU as well. We need to look together to find solutions. We need to find trustworthy and reliable partners and use our critical raw materials in a sustainable way. And to do this, we need to think in an innovative way. So thank you very much to the rapporteur and to the shadows.
Muito obrigado. Próximo orador, Lucas.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Lucas Kohut.
Bez śląskiego przemysłu I nowych miejsc.
Without the Silesian industry, without jobs in Silesia, there won't be this transformation in Europe. And without coking coal, we won't be able to get steel necessary for wind turbines and railways. Thanks to the work of the 20,000 miners in the mine in Silesia, we can produce coking coal, millions of tons of coking coal, which fulfills the needs of the EU. Coking coal is on the list of the CRM Act. This makes sense for Poland, for the European Union, because this will also help the wind turbines, which draw on coking coal from Silesia. Poland is one of the countries with the highest number of raw materials necessary. It's thanks to industry in Silesia that we will have clean energy. Thank you.
I think there's a point of order or a blue card. Blue card. You got a blue card, please.
Colleague, you have explained how much Polish coal stands at the center of our future. My question is, for how long do you think should we stick to the coal approach that you are advocating? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
Jeśli chodzi o, I will speak in Polish, if you don't mind. Jeśli chodzi o transformację energetyczną w Polsce I
Now, on energy and the extraction of coking coal in Silesia, there's an agreement between the trade unions on the one hand that negotiated this agreement with the Polish government, and this is up to 2049. For coking coal, it's a little bit different because, as I said, coking coal is a critical raw material to be able to produce steel. So we need to use this coking coal. It's better to use coking coal from Silesia than coking coal imported from China.
Muito obrigado. Próximo orador.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nicola Danti.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, well, in the wake of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the green transition, now we face strategic vulnerabilities. There are critical raw materials that we need for solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, etc., etc. So that's why today's vote is an important building block in creating a capacity for extraction and processing in Europe, whilst also ensuring higher rates of recycling and reinforcing our strategic autonomy. But to be freer, we will also need to be more active at the global level. We need to diversify sources through trade agreements with countries on other continents. We need to get beyond a mercantilist approach. We need to work together with the south of the world. We need to offer cooperation to Africa and South America. Colleagues, faced with climate change, we cannot respond like the right by denying the existence of the problems. Anyone who thinks that a small state can deal with the challenges of the future without relying on multilateralism and global cooperation is absolutely wrong. They are indispensable to overcome the problems we face.
Muito obrigado. Dou agora a palavra.
Thank you very much. I'll now give the floor to Alex Agius Saliba.
Il-pandemija u l-gwerra fl-Ukrajna fixklu l-ktajjen tal-provista globali kkawżaw nuqqas ta' materja.
Causing shortages of raw materials and making Europe realize that strategic raw materials are critical to achieve our environmental and climate objectives and digital transitions. Unfortunately, in the last few decades, we have become overly dependent or more than dependent on third countries for the extraction of critical raw materials needed to accomplish the green and digital transition. In the current geopolitical environment, this constitutes an unacceptable strategic vulnerability. Digital technologies and technological sovereignty will require access to strategic raw materials, which are key for some strategic technologies and are vulnerable to shortages. We urgently need to tackle the increase in demand for critical raw materials by supporting resilient and diversified supply chains to meet current and future demand for critical raw materials in the EU. We also need to support the promotion of the development and deployment of substitute raw materials and measures to ensure the EU's access to a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Niels Fuglsang is next.
Thank you, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner. For too long, we've been naively believing in globalization without asking critical questions. We thought we could get the goods that we needed from wherever we needed. It didn't matter who we became dependent on, as long as we could make a good deal. In the meantime, China has accelerated its industrial transformation and has monopolized a lot of the critical raw materials that we need, and we are indeed very dependent on China today. In fact, 98% of the rare earths that we need for our digital and green economy comes from China. They're being processed in China, and 60% of global lithium is being processed in China. So today we are dependent on a regime with whom we don't share values. It's about time we exit this situation. I think this act, the Critical Raw Materials Act, is a good step in the right direction. I'm especially happy to see the benchmark of recycling of raw materials of 25% by 2030, and that Europe should process 40% of its annual needs of raw material itself in 2030. Let's get rid of the dependency. Let's do it now. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Tem agora a palavra Maria Gra.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Maria Grappini.
Domnule președinte,
Speaker, Commissioner, dear colleagues, I don't think there's any doubt in anyone's mind that we need to have critical raw materials in the European Union. We need our own production and to no longer depend on third countries. We need critical raw materials for agriculture, healthcare, construction, and even for defense. Commissioner, in addition to the growth in demand, we have a problem with specialists. We don't have enough experts. By 2030, we need 1,200,000 people, experts in the field of electromobility. And we also need to urgently act so that we create a value chain here in the European Union. And this regulation will certainly help with the reindustrialization strategy. We need to improve recycling and to no longer directly or indirectly depend on third countries. We shouldn't criticize third countries for producing. We should produce ourselves. So I'm very grateful for this critical raw material committee that has just been set up. But I also wish that the European Parliament was a member of this committee. I understand that it's a subgroup that focuses on the involvement of SMEs, but I don't want to repeat the mistakes we made in the procurement directive. We have to involve SMEs directly. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Tem agora a palavra aqui.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Achille Variati.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Critical raw materials represent the components for a lot of components for the green transition. Our dependence on these resources has to be offset by the true understanding of the social environmental impact linked to extraction and production, both on our continent and especially in countries outside the EU that are the main producers. Given this backdrop, the trilogue agreement lays down measures to make sure we have a sustainable use of these raw materials and promoting new sustainable technology. We have to increase reuse and recycling, and that is one of the pillars of the national circular economy plans to boost economic growth, but at the same time protect our planet. So this act gives us the possibility of strengthening the strategic autonomy of our continent and moving towards a net zero economy by 2050. But Commissioner, we have to make sure that we avoid environmental and social disasters in the mines outside the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We come now to the Catch the Eye procedure. We have 3 requests. I'll give the floor to them all, starting by Anna Virkunen. You've got the floor.
Kiitos, arvoisa puhemies. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the negotiators for an excellent result and a very speedy processing. I think that this initiative regarding the critical raw materials as one of the most important ones of this legislation. The European Union must not be dependent in any critical sector on any third country. It is important to increase the production of critical raw materials in Europe, also their processing and their recycling. It would be responsible to promote the green transition and then externalize all its fallbacks outside Europe. We know that both from the point of view of environment and social rights and work, we can act in a responsible way and recycle. It is also important to invest in product development, and we have to create new substitute products, and we have to create new agreements with third countries so that we...
Thank you very much. Mick Wallace is next.
Mr. President, the transition to renewables will require a massive increase in levels of extraction, but we can significantly limit that increase by reducing absolute resource consumption. The Parliament's 2021 report on the Circular Economy Action Plan called on the Commission to propose targets to significantly reduce the EU's material and consumption footprints by 2030 and bring them within planetary boundaries by 2050. That was 3 years ago, and still the Commission has not acted. Instead, with the Critical Raw Materials Act, the EU is preparing to write a blank cheque for the mining and arms industries, while pretending this is climate action. Aluminium and titanium have been added to the list of critical raw materials. These minerals have very little to do with the energy transition, but they are crucial for the arms industry. An F-22 stealth bomber contains 39% titanium. The Critical Raw Materials Act will not make our economy greener, but it will certainly make a fortune for the arms industry.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Sean Kelly.
Critical raw materials mean exactly that. If it's critical, you can't do without them. And certainly in Europe, we have learned that lesson. And firstly, we need to look at what's available within Europe. I see in some countries, including my own, they have the mistaken idea that if you leave it in the ground in Ireland, take it out of the ground in some other country, import it into Ireland, that you're actually helping to fight climate change. That's ludicrous, utter nonsense. So we need to have an overall framework for Europe. If raw materials are available here, we use them. If they're not, we should look at where we can get them. And in that light, particularly free trade agreements have an awful lot to offer. We will be talking shortly about Taiwan. We've done a trade deal with New Zealand, which is very welcome. Unfortunately, the trade deal with Australia fell apart. That would have been very helpful in giving us critical raw materials like lithium. So we need to keep those going so that we can diversify supply, utilise what we have ourselves, and then get more that we need from other reliable sources.
Thank you very much. Now we come to the final statements in our debate. So I begin to give the floor to Commissioner Thierry Breton.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs.
President, members, Madam Rapporteur de Nicola, let me thank you first of all for today's debate on this regulation on critical raw materials. I think we're sending out a clear message that the EU is making progress in reducing its strategic dependencies. Now we need to take tangible steps to achieve this, working together with our international partners, looking at how we can make the most of the projects that are developing in the EU. Thanks to this regulation, we now have a framework in place. We can put the right authorizations in place. We've got all the member states working together on this problematic, working together with companies, and looking at putting in place monitoring systems, dealing with high-risk situations. We're working towards the deadline of 2030 in the medium term. We have ambitious targets we have put in place. Thanks to this regulation and other accompanying measures, I am sure that we will make progress immediately. Before concluding, let me just say the Commission is committed to putting out a communication on the review of the Electric Waste Directive. Now, with this act on critical raw materials, we're moving forward for green and digital transitions and strengthening Europe's resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now to conclude our debate, I give the floor to our rapporteur, Vice President Nicola Beer.
Cher Monsieur Commissaire, cher Thierry.
Commissioner Thierry, President, colleagues.
For all your contributions. Your participation in this debate is yet another example of our shared ambition on this very important topic. And I say it very clearly. Those who really take the green and the digital transition seriously has to vote yes today on the Critical Raw Materials Act. Important, today's debate and vote are not the end of the process, they are only the beginning of Europe's path towards a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. The European Union must now translate the ambition into concrete actions. Actions in the Member States and by the Commission, so that quick permits become reality and private investments in raw materials projects will be facilitated. Actions that make Europe a leader in the development of substitute materials and the implementation of innovative processes. And actions that deliver on our geopolitical ambitions to be a strategical sovereign union. We need a critical raw material agreement with Australia. Australia is a like-minded partner and ally for trade based on values, rules and fair competition. Let us seize the opportunity for free trade between partners and close cooperation on the raw material sector to strengthen the role of value-based cooperation in today's geopolitically stormy landscape. We need to approach our partnerships with countries of the so-called Global South by conveying clear messages. We want partnerships on equal footing. We want local value creation. We want mutual benefits for all partners involved. We want to do business with you. Let's use the momentum we have created for more raw material projects, more partnerships, and a more sovereign Europe. This law is only the beginning. Let us act now.
Thank you very much. Now, this debate is now closed.